On a cold night, an emergency 911 call opened the tragic story of Darren Blissett, a man who was rebuilding his life but faced death in his own apartment. From a single impulsive moment, a ruthless act of murder changed everything, disrupting not only Darren's life but also the lives of those around him. But will Murray, the one who caused this death, escape the punishment of the law? This heartbreaking story is not just a simple murder case, but a lesson about resilience, cruelty, and the price one must pay for thoughtless actions. Join us in this video to uncover the details of this shocking case, the secrets behind the secretive calls, and the challenging manhunt. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button to receive special offers and keep up with more gripping and dramatic stories from us. You definitely won't be able to take your eyes off these thrilling moments.
911, what is the address of the emergency?
Yes, send a squad car, 2025 Emerson.
Okay, and what's going on there?
872, I'm shot.
2025 Emerson Avenue North.
Yeah.
Who shot you? I got a open line. Oh. Are you there by yourself? If I get a paramedic on the line, can you talk to them? Oh my gosh.
Police and emergency responders arrive.
On the night of September 9th, Minneapolis was swallowed by an unexpected autumn chill. The wind howled through narrow streets, slicing through the night like invisible blades. Puddles formed cracked mirrors on the sidewalks, reflecting the flickering, sickly yellow of streetlights struggling against the darkness. The air was thick, damp, metallic, heavy with a coming storm. Minneapolis by night was never truly peaceful, but tonight it seemed as though even the heartbeat of the city slowed down, holding its breath for something unseen lurking in the shadows. On North Emerson Avenue, the house at 2025 stood silent under the misty rain. A narrow crack left in its window, and through that crack, fate slipped in. The shrill ring of a 911 call pierced the rain and darkness like a blade. The sound was desperate, a fragile mix of fear and agony. On the other end of the line, Darren Blissett's voice broke the silence, barely more than a breath. "I've been shot." The dispatcher leaned closer, straining to keep him talking, to anchor him to life, to pull him back from the edge he was already slipping over. But it was a losing battle. Darren's voice grew fainter and fainter, until it dissolved completely, swallowed by the relentless tapping of rain against the window pane. In that moment, time seemed to freeze. No sirens, no footsteps, no shouts, only a heavy, crushing silence seas if the entire world knew that something irreversible had just happened. Minutes later, flashing red and blue lights tore through the rainy gloom as patrol cars screeched to a halt. Officers charged into the building, desperate to reclaim whatever life remained. But it was already too late. Darren Blissett lay motionless, blood pooling beneath him on the worn wooden floor, mixing with the cold rain that seeped in through the unlatched door. Outside, the rain hammered down harder, as if mourning, as if raging against the night. Another life extinguished on the battered streets of Minneapolis. Quietly, coldly, and with the brutal indifference that death carries in broken cities like this one. Sometimes, death doesn't knock, it kicks the door down. For Darren Blissett, that night was the end of every dream, every hope, every second chance he thought he had left. He slipped away into the silence, leaving behind nothing but a fading mark that no one could ever erase. But this was not the end of the story. Because somewhere out there, in the endless rain and concrete alleys, the man who brought death still walked free, carrying with him a weapon, a heavy conscience, and dark secrets waiting to be unearthed. North Emerson Avenue, Minneapolis, a name more often found in crime reports than in peaceful neighborhood stories. Rows of crumbling apartment buildings lined the street, paint peeling from the walls, windows cracked and haphazardly patched with duct tape or wooden boards. Vacant lots had long turned into dumping grounds, littered with used needles, a silent testament to the deals struck in the dead of night. North Emerson wasn't a place where dreams were built. It was where dreams came to die. At the time Darren Blissett fell, Minneapolis was grappling with a grim reality. Gun violence had surged by 23% compared to the previous year. Gunshots echoing through the night had become a familiar backdrop, so common that even young children learned to distinguish between the sound of fireworks and the crack of gunfire before they could recite their ABCs. On North Emerson, survival wasn't just about living. It was a daily battle fought in wary glances cast over doorsteps, indoors slammed shut the moment footsteps echoed down the hallways, in every small act of caution that might mean the difference between life and death. Residents of all ages shared the same invisible scar: fear. No one ventured out after 9 p.m. unless absolutely necessary. Windows stayed shut no matter how suffocating the summer air. A barking dog in the middle of the night, a window rattling in the wind, footsteps scraping the pavement. Any sound could signal the start of something terrible. A single mother raising 2 small children just 50 meters from where Darren was shot once confessed in tears, "I can't tell anymore if I'm dreaming or trapped in a nightmare. Even in my sleep, I hear the gunshots." For elderly men like Willie Lloyd, the one who unknowingly opened the door for Jeffrey Murray that night, the fear weighed heavier. They knew that in this place, one wrong decision, one moment of hesitation, could turn them from witnesses into victims. Every morning, neighbors counted the number of police cruisers parked outside, instead of exchanging greetings. Every night, they bolted their doors tighter, pulled their curtains thicker, whispered their prayers a little louder. But hope for a safer tomorrow had worn thin, threadbare from the endless violence. North Emerson Avenue was no longer a neighborhood. It was a battlefield, an invisible trench where every resident fought a lonely, silent war. And in that trench, Darren Blissett was a lone soldier, unarmed, unshielded, carrying only the fragile hope of a better life. On the night Darren called 911, no one heard the first shot. No one ran toward his door. No one called out to check if he was okay. Because on North Emerson, silence had become the survival instinct. When a strange noise rang out, people didn't rush to help. They locked their doors, held their breath, and prayed the violence would pass them by. Here, people had long since learned to live with fear as part of their daily rhythm. Like the cracks in their walls, the crumbling sidewalks, and the averted eyes of strangers passing each other on the street, fear had become just another fixture of life. And so, when Darren Blisset's life ended that night, it wasn't a shockwave, it was a silent sorrow, another small fracture in a community already splintering under the weight of its own despair. In North Emerson, every death wasn't just the loss of a life. It was a chilling reminder. No matter how many locks you bolt, no matter how many curtains you draw, no one is ever truly safe. Darren Blissett was not a man who had been handed opportunities on a silver platter. He grew up in a poor neighborhood where each day was a struggle between poverty and broken dreams. But Darren, with a strong spirit, fought to find a different path, a way out of the hardships he had witnessed throughout his childhood. He wasn't the kind of person you'd see in heroic movies, nor was he an ideal model in society. He was just an ordinary man, unremarkable in many ways, but full of determination. Darren's life had always been a series of challenges and failures, but he never gave up. Though he stumbled many times, he always picked himself back up, again and again. About a year before the tragedy struck, Darren decided to change. He saw an opportunity, saw a brighter path, and this time, he wasn't going to let it slip away. He got engaged to Phyllis, a woman he loved deeply, and someone he believed would be the solid foundation for his new life. Phyllis was not only his partner, but also his hope for a fresh start. Phyllis was the one who pulled Darren out of the dark shadow he had lived in for so many years. She was the only one who believed that he could change. She helped him realize that no matter how grim his past had been, the future could still shine if he dared to step onto a new road. They began making plans for a future that wouldn't be filled with money worries or sleepless nights in fear. A few months before the tragedy, Darren had secured a stable job at a construction company in the city. It wasn't a glamorous job, nor was it a high-paying one, but it was enough to give him peace of mind, a job he could stick with long-term and provide Phyllis and their children with a better life. This new job was a turning point in Darren's life. He no longer had to scramble for temporary jobs. No longer did he have to live in the uncertainty of tomorrow. He started dreaming of a calmer life, one where they would move to a peaceful suburban neighborhood, free from the sound of sirens or gunshots echoing through the night. Phyllis had found a small house in a quiet suburban area, far from the chaos of the city, and they planned to move there. Darren imagined the quiet mornings, when the whole family could have breakfast together, and peaceful evenings watching TV without worrying about what was happening outside. He had started preparing for this new life, taking careful steps. They had already chosen schools for their children, learned about the local amenities in their new neighborhood, and Darren had planned to move into the new house by early next year. Everything seemed to be falling into place. After all the struggles, Darren finally believed that his life wouldn't be a series of failures and hardships. He would have a happy family, a stable job, and a home filled with laughter. However, life doesn't always go according to plan. On the night of September 9th, just as Darren was about to embark on a new chapter, death came like an unexpected storm, shattering all the dreams and hopes he had built. That night, when the darkness had fallen and the rain began to pour over the city, Darren had no idea that the 911 call he made would be his final goodbye to the world. No one knew that. In that moment, his life would end, and Phyllis, the woman he believed would walk beside him, would be left to carry the weight of an unimaginable loss. That night, Darren would never see the new house he had dreamed of, nor would he ever get the chance to be the father he had always hoped to be. What remained was nothing but the shattered remnants of an unfulfilled dream. So, when everything was over, it wasn't just Darren who was gone. A part of his future, the plans that never came to fruition, the dreams that remained unfulfilled, were all left behind in that rainy night. And nothing would ever change that. Jeffrey Murray, also known as St. Louis, was a name all too familiar to law enforcement. A seasoned criminal, his reputation was tied to armed robberies, aggravated assaults, and illegal gambling. With over 15 prior convictions, each crime left a stain that could never be erased. To society, he was a shadow that never disappeared, a part of the darkness that haunted the streets of poor neighborhoods. Murray never considered himself a bad person. He always had an explanation for his actions, always a story to tell. He believed he was a victim of the system, someone abandoned and left with no choice but to survive by any means. In his mind, failure was unacceptable, and one last big hit was his only chance to change his life. Murray constantly told himself that he would make one final score, a big win that would set him free, change everything. He would leave behind the criminal life, start fresh. But, like most things in his life, it wasn't that simple. A few weeks before meeting Darren, Murray had gotten involved in a high-stakes underground gambling ring. He placed all his money on a single bet, thinking it would be his way out, but that gamble ended with him losing everything. All his savings, every last dollar, were gone. He was left with nothing. No money, no assets, and worst of all, no way out. He knew that in the criminal world, once you're in deep, it's hard to escape. And now, on top of everything else, he had the pressure of street gangs demanding payment for his debts. That failure was more than just a financial loss, it was a blow to Murray's pride. He had promised himself he would never be defeated, but now all those promises felt like empty words. Nothing was left for him except the dangerous ties to criminal groups and the growing mountain of debt. Murray began to feel like a cornered animal, no way out. The gangsters he owed money to were closing in, and the pressure to repay was suffocating. Every time he stepped outside, the threatening stares of the loan sharks haunted him. He knew that one day, if he didn't pay up, those men wouldn't just want their money, they would want his life. With the weight of his debt and the imminent threat of violence, Jeffrey Murray had become a puppet in the hands of dangerous men. But there was no way out. He needed money, he needed a breakthrough, and he needed it fast, or else he would be trapped forever. Then, on one rainy night, just when everything seemed to have slipped beyond his reach, Murray saw an opportunity, or at least, he thought he did. This time, it wouldn't be about gambling or risky deals. He had a new plan known that he thought could bring him the cash he desperately needed, though it came with its own set of dangers. His encounter with Darren Blissett was not planned out perfectly, but it would change everything. As he arrived at 2025 North Emerson, where Darren lived with his fiancée, Murray wasn't aware that this meeting would be the moment that sealed his fate. He was simply looking for a quick way to get his hands on something valuable, whatever it took. Murray, already stretched thin with pressure from the street gangs and a pile of unpaid debts, was on edge. But what he didn't realize was that he was about to drag himself into a game he couldn't walk away from. No one would have predicted that Darren Blissett, an innocent man, would become tangled in the web of destruction Murray had woven. Walking into the building, Murray wasn't prepared for the consequences of his actions. He was already stuck in a vicious cycle of crime and pressure, but this was different. This was a moment where his next move would determine everything, whether he would be freed from his debts or buried deeper in them. The conversation with Darren that night would set in motion a tragedy neither of them saw coming. In that terrifying moment, when every choice seemed wrong and every option led to a dead end, Murray faced consequences he couldn't undo. Murray stepped out into the cold rain, feeling as if each raindrop was about to tear him apart. The rain fell in heavy drops, splashing onto the ground before merging with the dirt on the sidewalk. The surroundings were bleak, like the turmoil brewing inside him, a blurry picture, no longer clear, drowned in confusion. The night was dark, not only hiding the street but also concealing the faintest glimmer of hope. The pressure from the loan sharks was suffocating. Murray knew that if he didn't find a way out, it wouldn't just be his money that was gone, it would be his life. He had come here for one simple reason. Though it felt hopeless, she needed money. The entire neighborhood, the entire street, seemed like they couldn't help him. But there was one person he thought might Darren Blissett. Murray knew that Darren had just started a stable job, and although it wasn't much, it was steady. In his mind, the plan was simple: ask to borrow money. He told himself it was just a small amount, enough to cover some of his debts, and then he would figure out the rest. But when he arrived at Darren's apartment, he realized things weren't going to be as easy as he had hoped. Standing in front of apartment 2025, staring into the dark window, everything felt silent and foreboding. He knocked on the door repeatedly, banging hard as if trying to wake the whole world, but no one answered. The knocks grew louder, but there was no response, just an eerie silence. A sense of desperation began to rise within him, like a fire igniting in his chest. He couldn't stand there anymore, waiting uselessly. He turned, looked around, and searched for another way in. The rain grew heavier, making the surroundings even murkier. Everything seemed to blend into one. And then, his gaze fixed on the window. If he couldn't get in through the door, he thought, maybe he could get their attention some other way. A simple yet dangerous idea formed. He searched his pocket and pulled out a sharp rock, about the size of his fist. He raised it, threw it with all his might at the window. The glass shattered with a loud, jarring sound, cutting through the quiet night. For a brief moment, the silence was broken. He waited. The sound of the glass breaking still rang in the air. His heart pounded in his chest as he heard footsteps from inside the apartment. Maybe it was Phyllis, Darren's girlfriend, coming to see what was going on. He quickly scanned his surroundings, trying to keep calm, but in that moment, he couldn't stop thinking about what would happen next. Part of him felt that this might be his lucky break. Another part sensed the danger growing closer. After a moment, the door opened. But it wasn't Darren, it was Willie Lloyd, an elderly neighbor in the building. He stood there, a look of suspicion in his eyes. Murray, keeping his composure, tried to force a smile, trying to ease the tension, but deep down, he knew this was the first challenge of the night. "What's going on?" Willie asked, his voice shaky but still trying to stand firm. Murray pointed to the broken window and said carefully, "I just need to talk to Darren. I've got something important to discuss. Just tell him I can help with something, if he needs it." Willie looked at him, his eyes full of doubt but also concern, as if he didn't want to make a fuss. "You can't just keep doing this. Go find him, then leave," Willie said. But, maybe tired, and not wanting trouble, he opened the door, hesitantly inviting Murray in. As Murray stepped into the apartment, he felt the heavy air, as if everything inside was reflecting the anxiety and tension of its residents. The rain outside still poured down, and inside the apartment, the faint glow from a desk lamp illuminated Darren's face, who was still lying in bed. It was at this moment that Murray thought of the question he had been waiting to ask for so long, a question that would change everything. "Does he have a gun?" Murray asked, his voice dry, heavy with the weight of what was about to come. Darren, though still groggy, looked at him with a challenging gaze. "I don't have it," Darren responded, but his words felt like a fleeting breeze. Murray pulled the gun from his waistband and pointed it directly at Darren. "I need it," Murray said, his voice cold and resolute. This was the moment when both of their lives would change forever. Willie Lloyd lived alone in an apartment on the third floor of 2025 North Emerson Avenue. His room, like all the others in the building, was old, cluttered, filled with items that seemed to hold no value to anyone else but him. Willie wasn't a man of many possessions, but he didn't live in dire poverty either. What he lacked was joy and peace. As an older man, Willie no longer had the energy to race with life. He just wanted to live quietly, away from all the noise and stress. Day after day, he spent most of his time sitting alone in his apartment, occasionally going out to buy food or engaging in short conversations with neighbors he barely knew. His life was simple, quiet, and predictable. But all of that would change on one fateful rainy night, when he unwittingly became a part of a story he never wished to be involved in. Murray showed up at Willie's apartment late at night, just as the rain began to pour heavily, the sound of water hitting the windows like an omen. Willie was sitting in his armchair, watching an old movie on TV, as he usually did. When he heard the loud knocking on his door, he was startled. Who could be visiting him at this hour? Willie got up slowly, his old legs moving with reluctance. He peered through the window and saw a man standing outside, drenched in rain, looking somewhat hurried and unfamiliar. Willie didn't recognize him. Still, part of him, perhaps out of his own loneliness, felt some sympathy for the stranger standing out in the rain. "What's going on?" Willie asked, his voice hoarse from age, though still trying to maintain his composure. "I'm looking for Darren Blissett," Murray said urgently. "I just need to talk to him. It's important. Just let him know I can help with something if he needs it." Willie squinted at him, unsure whether he could trust this man, but seeing the concern in his eyes and perhaps feeling some kind of duty, he hesitated for a moment, then decided to open the door. "Darren's not always home," he responded, but didn't close the door. He simply wanted to avoid any trouble. Murray smiled faintly, stepping inside, looking hurried but polite. The door closed behind him, and Willie followed him into the apartment. Willie never thought that by opening that door, he was not just letting a man into his home, but also unwittingly opening the gateway to a tragedy he couldn't have foreseen. Inside, the atmosphere of the apartment felt heavy, as if everything within was a reflection of the tension and worry of its inhabitants. The rain still poured outside, and inside the apartment, the dim light from a desk lamp cast a faint glow on Darren's face, still asleep in his bed. It was in that moment that Murray finally asked the question he had been waiting to ask for so long, a question that would change everything. "Does he have a gun?" Murray asked, his voice dry, heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. Darren, though still groggy, looked up at him with a challenging gaze. "I don't have it," Darren replied, but his words felt like a fleeting breeze. Murray pulled a gun from his waistband and aimed it directly at Darren. "I need it," Murray said, his voice cold without hesitation. This was the moment when both their lives would change forever. The atmosphere inside apartment 2025 grew suffocating, as if time had come to a halt in the thick tension hanging in the air. The sound of rain outside, pounding against the windows, was like a steady beat, making the space inside feel even heavier. Murray stood in the center of the living room, his hand tightly gripping the gun, his eyes deep with desperation and threat. He fixed his gaze on Darren, who was still sitting on the sofa, his face hollow, trying to maintain composure despite the obvious danger. Darren, though his hands trembled, held his gaze on Murray. The only thing he had left to hold on to was the courage that refused to yield. He could feel the danger that loomed in the room, but he also knew that there was nothing he could do to change the situation. His life had collided with death, and now he had only one option: to fight or to surrender. Murray didn't say anything more, stepping closer to Darren, his eyes never leaving his target. He gave Darren one final demand. "Give me the gun. You don't need it." His voice was flat, heavy with restraint. Those words were not a request, but an order. Death had extended its hand, and Murray had made the decision to follow through. Darren still did not move. His mind raced, but his gaze remained fixed on Murray. He knew that if he gave up the gun, he would have nothing left to protect himself, nothing left but a desperate plea for mercy. It was the only weapon he had, hidden under the cushion of the sofa, out of Murray's sight. A part of Darren wanted to get up, to fight, but he also knew that facing a man with a gun meant he didn't stand a chance. Yet in that moment, another kind of fire sparked in his eyes. Determination. "If you think I'll hand over the gun, you're mistaken," Darren said, his voice cold. It wasn't strong, but it was enough to make the tension rise higher. He couldn't let himself fail, couldn't let death come without a fight, no matter how slim the chance. Murray's gaze darkened, his patience wearing thin. He saw the resistance in Darren, and that only made him more determined. He couldn't afford to waste time negotiating or bargaining. This had gone past that. Now it was life and death, and one of them would have to fall. Without another word, Murray pulled the gun from his waistband and aimed it squarely at Darren. In that instant, the air seemed to still. Everything around them fell silent, and the room held its breath. Without hesitation, Murray fired. The sound of the shot ripped through the silence, splitting the air with a sharp crack. Darren barely had time to react. His body jerked back from the impact, and he reached down beneath the cushion for the gun, trying desperately to grab it, but it was too late. The pain from the bullet in his chest was overwhelming, but still, he fought on, trying to reach the weapon that could save him. Darren's hand fumbled beneath the pillow, but his strength was fading. Blood oozed from the wound, soaking his shirt, and his vision blurred as he desperately fought to breathe. But Murray's shot had struck true, and there was no escaping it. Darren's attempt to defend himself was futile. In the midst of the chaos, a shadow moved in the bathroom doorway. Phyllis, Darren's fiancée, had been in the other room, unaware of the horror unfolding just beyond the bathroom door. She had heard the gunshot, the crashing sound of the glass breaking, and the following silence that had filled the apartment with dread. She stepped out cautiously, her heart pounding, but when she saw Darren slumped on the couch, blood pooling around him, and Murray standing there with the gun still raised, her eyes widened in shock. For a moment, she didn't scream, didn't cry out. She stood frozen, her eyes wide with terror as she realized the nightmare that had just come to life before her. Her gaze locked onto Darren, his body motionless, his chest rising and falling slowly in a struggle that was too late to win. Phyllis could see the fear in his eyes, even in that brief second, and knew that everything they had planned, everything they had dreamed of, was now shattered. Murray stood still, his gun still pointed at Darren, although there was no movement from him anymore. He didn't feel any remorse, just an emptiness in his chest. He had done what he came to do, but he didn't realize that Darren's death was not just the end of one life, it was the beginning of a cascade of consequences that no one could stop. After the deadly shot rang out, time seemed to stand still for a moment. The sound of the gunshot shattered the silence, ripping through the air with a brutal force. Darren collapsed, blood spreading across the floor, and Phyllis stood frozen, her eyes empty as she stared at the man she loved slipping away, breath fading. But for Murray, there was no time to stop. He didn't look back, no regrets. There was only one thing on his mind: get out of there before everything spiraled beyond control. While Phyllis remained motionless, unable to speak, Murray quickly bent down, grabbed Darren's gun from under the pillow, tucked it into his jacket, and moved swiftly toward the door. His footsteps were quick, decisive, but filled with anxiety. The rain outside was like a curtain, making the air colder and harsher. Every step he took was one closer to the unknown. The door creaked open and he rushed out into the night, never once looking back. The feeling of urgency weighed heavy in his chest. He couldn't afford to hesitate, couldn't risk it. One wrong move, one delay, and it would all come crashing down. With each step, Murray could feel the pressure building. The rain came down harder, each drop biting against his skin, against his soaked jacket. His footsteps echoed on the wet pavement, but there was no
Police
stopping.
and emergency
No time to
responders
think
arrive.
about anything other than escaping. He had walked into this nightmare, and now there was no way out but forward. When he reached the steps, Murray slipped on the wet surface. His knees hit the cold concrete with a jarring thud, but before he could even think of the pain, he was back on his feet, not allowing himself a moment to breathe. The rain came down harder, merging with the sound of his hurried steps. The cold was biting, but it wasn't the chill that worried him. It was the urgency, the desperate need to escape. He ran through the alleyways, past darkened buildings. The world around him was blurry, everything blending into the backdrop of his frantic dash. The streets seemed to have no end, and yet they only led him further into the night. The silence that had consumed the neighborhood before was now broken by his footsteps, like a beacon calling for pursuit. He could hear sirens in the distance. The sound of approaching police cars sent a jolt through him. He couldn't stop now. No matter what, he had to keep running. He couldn't let them catch him. Not tonight. Murray pushed forward, passing familiar corners and buildings, each step carrying him deeper into the night. The wet streets shimmered in the dull light, reflecting his fear. He had no plan, no direction, only the will to flee. The weight of his actions, the murder he had just committed, was heavy in his mind, but there was no room for guilt now. He couldn't afford to look back, couldn't afford to think. It was too late for regrets. Once again, his feet slipped on the slick pavement. His body hit the ground hard, pain shooting up his legs, but there was no time to rest. He pushed himself up, shaking off the fall, and kept moving. The darkness was his only ally now, but it also closed in around him like a trap, tightening its grip. He stumbled through the rain-soaked streets, heart racing, breath short. The cold seeped into his bones, but it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was survival. The weight of what he had just done shooting Darren, taking a life was something that would haunt him later. But for now, there was no time for reflection, only escape. His mind flickered to Phyllis for a moment. Her face, filled with horror as she saw Darren fall, was burned into his memory. But Murray knew he couldn't go back. It was too late for that. The night had already swallowed them whole, and there was no going back. He ran, disappearing into the night, with no idea where he was going, but knowing he couldn't stop. Not until he was out of sight, far from everything he had just destroyed. The rain had stopped, but the atmosphere was still filled with tension. The police began to intensify their search for Murray. After the murder of Darren Blissett was confirmed and the events at apartment 2025 were reconstructed, it didn't take long for the police to realize that everything wasn't as simple as it seemed. Behind Darren's death was an underground criminal network, secret calls, and a cunning criminal like Murray. As soon as investigators found traces of Murray, they began to monitor every move he made. His covert phone calls with his girlfriend, Jaime, were key to unlocking important clues. Despite Murray's efforts to keep his secrets, every call he made left traces on the mobile network. The police quickly realized that one of the ways he evaded detection was by constantly changing his phone number and using new SIM cards. Each time, he used fake names and changed numbers to throw them off, creating a closed loop that even modern technology had difficulty keeping up with. Each time the police got close, he would change numbers, like a rat running through an endless maze. This tactic not only made the manhunt more difficult, but also showed that he was always prepared for any situation. The mobile phone system couldn't keep up with his constant SIM swaps. Each time, he had a reasonable excuse. My phone's broken. Or the old number's no longer in use. These excuses seemed harmless, but were, in reality, a way for him to mislead the police, forcing them to start over every time they discovered something. Still, the calls couldn't completely disappear. Every time Jaime called him, whether it was an unusual call or a message through an app, detectives paid close attention and traced every lead. They meticulously checked his recent calls and discovered a few strange calls made at suspicious hours. Through these calls, they not only pinpointed his hiding location, but also sensed the desperation in Murray's words. Jaime, the one person he trusted most, now became part of the larger picture the police were piecing together. Although she wasn't directly involved in the crime, the calls and exchanges with Jaime helped the police locate where Murray was hiding. They followed the trail of his calls and identified the area where he could be hiding. As the investigators prolonged their analysis of the calls, they realized something important. Murray, who had always been meticulous, was finally showing signs of faltering. The phone calls between him and Jaime started to repeat, as though he had no other choice but to return to familiar places. The police discovered that he had returned to the city of Minneapolis the day after the murder. He was becoming careless in his search for a safe place. From his relentless calls, they pinpointed a possible location, a quiet residential area where Murray might be trying to hide, seeking refuge after the dark days. Once they had the lead, the police immediately began planning a surround operation. By combining clues from the calls, analyzing the data from his phone devices, the police started narrowing the search area. They also began examining Jaime's recent calls, even though she had tried to conceal all contact with Murray. Each call seemed to bring them closer to him. The manhunt grew urgent. They knew they couldn't give Murray any more time. Every second that passed was another opportunity for him to escape, and the police couldn't afford to fail. But there was one thing Murray didn't realize. Once he left a trace, no matter how many times he changed his phone number or SIM card, the truth would eventually catch up to him. The tension in the investigation team mounted. The detectives were no longer just facing a lone criminal, but a grueling pursuit, a race against time, where even the smallest mistake could derail the entire investigation. The relentless calls from Murray and Jaime were leading them to the inevitable conclusion. More than a month had passed since Murray disappeared into the shadows, and during that time, he had been like a ghost. The police continued their search, but every lead seemed to end in a dead end. He had changed his name, swapped SIM cards, and done everything he could to conceal himself. But in the end, with nowhere left to hide, Murray was caught in an abandoned house where he had been trying to lay low, thinking he could remain unseen in the darkness. When the police raided the house, Murray didn't resist. He knew, once he was discovered, everything was over. The days of running had drained him, worn him down with fear and anxiety. He no longer had the strength to continue fighting. When the officers hauled him out of the house, he was no longer the clever criminal he once was simply a tired man, with no other choice but to face what he had done. In the interrogation room, Murray sat in silence for a long while, as if trying to figure out how to spin his story. The silence in the room only intensified the tension. The detective, who would soon face him in this pivotal moment, didn't rush. They knew that dealing with someone like Murray wasn't easy. He had experience, evading law enforcement for years. He wasn't easily swayed or coerced. With a faint smile, the detective sat across from Murray, keeping his demeanor calm and collected. "Murray, we've got a lot to talk about," the investigator began, his voice steady. "But I'm not going to waste your time. You know where you are and why you're here." Murray remained silent, avoiding eye contact. His eyes darted around, not meeting the detective's gaze. For a moment, it was clear that Murray knew he couldn't escape the truth. The silence betrayed him. Every word the detective spoke, whether a question or a simple statement, felt like a pointed arrow aimed straight at his fractured mind. "Murray, you can't hide everything forever," the investigator continued. "We've got plenty of evidence from your phone records to your calls with Jaime. Don't think you can get away from this." For a brief second, Murray's eyes flicked upward. It was the first sign of unease. However, he quickly tried to regain his composure, forcing out a hoarse response. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice rough. "It's all just a misunderstanding. I didn't do anything wrong." The detective didn't rush to answer, just observing him closely. They knew this was just a game, and every word Murray spoke would only trap him deeper in his own contradictions. "Murray," the detective said gently, "you can say it was an accident. But why did you run? Why did you use fake names, change your phone number, swap SIM cards over and over again? You think we wouldn't catch up with that?" Murray shook his head, his eyes still avoiding the investigators. But deep down, he realized he had no escape. The detective's words were methodical, cutting through his defenses like a scalpel. The uneasiness that had settled in Murray's chest was slowly becoming an undeniable truth. He had tried to outrun the law, but now, with every question, he felt himself slipping further into the grip of justice. "Murray," the investigator repeated, this time with a slight pause, "you know there's nowhere left to hide. The phone calls, the SIM swaps, it's all part of the puzzle. And we've almost put it all together." For the first time, Murray's calm facade cracked. His breathing became uneven, his hands clenched into fists. He wanted to argue, to deny it all, but deep down, he knew he couldn't. He had been caught, not just by the police, but by his own lies. The truth was too glaring to deny anymore. After a long silence, Murray finally spoke, his voice quieter, almost resigned. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "I just wanted to get away from it all. I didn't think it would go this far." The investigator nodded, acknowledging the confession without feeling a sense of triumph. They had already known the truth. Now, it was just about bringing the rest of the story into the light. A month had passed since Murray disappeared into the shadows, and during that time, he had been like a ghost. The police continued their search, but every lead seemed to end in a dead end. He had changed his name, swapped SIM cards, and done everything he could to conceal himself. But in the end, with nowhere left to hide, Murray was caught in an abandoned house where he had been trying to lay low, thinking he could remain unseen in the darkness. When the police raided the house, Murray didn't resist. He knew, once he was discovered, everything was over. The days of running had drained him, worn him down with fear and anxiety. He no longer had the strength to continue fighting. When the officers hauled him out of the house, he was no longer the clever criminal he once was simply a tired man, with no other choice but to face what he had done. In the interrogation room, Murray sat in silence for a long while, as if trying to figure out how to spin his story. The silence in the room only intensified the tension. The detective, who would soon face him in this pivotal moment, didn't rush. They knew that dealing with someone like Murray wasn't easy. He had experience, evading law enforcement for years. He wasn't easily swayed or coerced. With a faint smile, the detective sat across from Murray, keeping his demeanor calm and collected. "Murray, we've got a lot to talk about," the investigator began, his voice steady. "But I'm not going to waste your time. You know where you are, and why you're here." Murray remained silent, avoiding eye contact. His eyes darted around, not meeting the detective's gaze. For a moment, it was clear that Murray knew he couldn't escape the truth. The silence betrayed him. Every word the detective spoke, whether a question or a simple statement, felt like a pointed arrow aimed straight at his fractured mind. "Murray, you can't hide everything forever," the investigator continued. "We've got plenty of evidence from your phone records to your calls with Jaime. Don't think you can get away with this." For a brief second, Murray's eyes flicked upward. It was the first sign of unease. However, he quickly tried to regain his composure, forcing out a hoarse response. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice rough. "It's all just a misunderstanding. I didn't do anything wrong." The detective didn't rush to answer, just observing him closely. They knew this was just a game, and every word Murray spoke would only trap him deeper in his own contradictions. "Murray," the detective said gently, "you can say it was an accident, but why did you run? Why did you use fake names, change your phone number, swap SIM cards over and over again? You think we wouldn't catch up with that?" Murray shook his head, his eyes still avoiding the investigators, but deep down, he realized he had no escape. The detective's words were methodical, cutting through his defenses like a scalpel. The uneasiness that had settled in Murray's chest was slowly becoming an undeniable truth. He had tried to outrun the law, but now, with every question, he felt himself slipping further into the grip of justice. "Murray," the detective repeated, this time with a slight pause, "you know there's nowhere left to hide. The phone calls, the SIM swaps, it's all part of the puzzle, and we've almost put it all together." For the first time, Murray's calm facade cracked. His breathing became uneven, his hands clenched into fists. He wanted to argue, to deny it all, but deep down, he knew he couldn't. He had been caught, not just by the police, but by his own lies. The truth was too glaring to deny anymore. After a long silence, Murray finally spoke, his voice quieter, almost resigned. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "I just wanted to get away from it all. I didn't think it would go this far." The investigator nodded, acknowledging the confession without feeling a sense of triumph. They had already known the truth. Now, it was just about bringing the rest of the story into the light. The day of the verdict had finally arrived. The Minneapolis court was ready to face one of the most shocking cases of the year. Murray, the man who had killed Darren Blissett in a fit of rage during a cold, rainy night, now had to face the sentence he could no longer escape. Murray sat silently in the courtroom, his eyes no longer filled with arrogance. He, who had once been confident and cunning, was now a man in custody, facing those who had witnessed the crime he had committed. He knew that, regardless of his reasons, what he had done had changed both his and others' destinies. Throughout the trial, the testimonies of witnesses and the irrefutable evidence from phone calls and surveillance footage pieced the entire story together. From the secretive calls with Jaime to the camera footage outside Building 2025, everything clearly outlined the crime Murray had committed. The testimonies, particularly from Jaime, made clear his intent to use violence to seize money and protection he thought he deserved. After a tense trial, the final words from the jury and judge left Murray with no room for escape. He was convicted of second-degree murder and illegal possession of a firearm. This conviction was not just the end of one life, but the culmination of a series of calculated and heartless actions. Faced with his sentence, Murray could not lift his head. He sat silently, as if he had already accepted his fate. The sentence was delivered. 486 months in prison, equivalent to over 40 years. This was the price he had to pay for an act of rage, a moment that not only took the life of a man but also destroyed his own. But the cost wasn't just his freedom, it was his humanity. When a person lets anger take control, when they let impulsive decisions lead them down a path of crime, they don't only lose their physical freedom, but also the dignity of being human. Murray might be imprisoned, but the loss he had to endure the regret and torment would stay with him forever, no matter how much time passed. The police, the judge, and everyone involved knew that in cases like this, there were no true winners. Darren was gone, and his life ended in painful tragedy. Phyllis, who lost the man she loved, would live the rest of her life with that pain. As for Murray, though he might find solace in his sentence, he would never escape from what he had caused. The price of Murray's rash act wasn't just a court sentence. It was the irreplaceable loss of his humanity, the ability to recognize and feel the value of life. That rainy night, Murray had pushed himself down a path with no return, and now he had to pay the price for what he had done. The story of Darren Blissett is not just a personal tragedy, but also a warning for all of us. Sometimes we live in a world where we believe the dangers are always distant, where we think that tragedies happen to others, not to us. But the truth is, we never know when a nightmare will knock on our door. Darren, a man rebuilding his life, couldn't escape a moment of reckless anger. An impulsive act, a wrong decision on a rainy night, took his life and changed the fate of many. Darren's story reminds us that cruelty can come from the most unexpected places and can turn a peaceful life into a tragedy in an instant. We all think that tragedy happens to someone else, until it knocks on our door. And when that happens, all we can do is face the consequences. Don't let neglect or indifference lead us into making wrong decisions.